Well, hello, Cooksters. My goodness, it's your old buddy, Christofer Cook, back. And can you believe it? It is now 4 years after I began the process of writing the biography of Ted Cassidy, Lurching Forward, Ted Cassidy's early life from cradle to creature. And we had a really great book launch last night. It was a lot of fun. A lot of people came out, shook a lot of hands, kissed a lot of babies, and just had a grand old time celebrating the life and the legacy of Ted Cassidy. So here we are, and my good buddy Jeff Bailey was able to come down also, and so he's actually doing the cinematography for us. Anyway, I'm so excited that you guys are back to check out some of the scenes. We'll bring more of that to you in a moment when we return. So right now, I'm just applying the rough shadows so that we can have an idea about where those lines are going to be. And then I'm going to add the highlights and then do a little blending. Not too much blending or else it won't be seen from the audience, but just enough blending so that he looks good and has that finished look.
Homemade pepperoni rolls.
Oh, lovely. Lurch cookies. My goodness. Books everywhere. Oh, you sprung for the hardback.
I think I bought the second one on Amazon. I think I was the second order on Amazon.
Nice.
I'm John Shaw. This is my wife Jennifer. This
Hello.
is my sister Lynn Yakovic.
Hi,
We're
hi.
actually in the book. Our dad was Ted's friend from high school here in Philadelphia.
Okay.
They were close friends. So we were very good friends all the way through to Wesleyan for a couple years. And then when Ted left to go to Stetson, then they got it.
We had a brother named Ted.
And our
Oh,
brother's
okay.
name was named after Ted.
Okay, there you go.
So I'm going to tone down those sharp Dracula eyebrows. Don't
Okay.
worry, folks.
They're curious brows.
They are.
They are very curious brows. Ah. Oh, nice. I haven't seen that. That's nice. Oh. So when do you start your presentation?
6:30, though I guess depending on if there's a lot of people in and they seem to be getting antsy, I might start a little earlier to do a bit of the crowd work.
You got tough questions?
No. I figured the tough questions will be for Sean to ask Chris later.
Gotcha.
I'm throwing the low balls is what I'm planning on throwing.
Now, this will be aired later, of course, but what's the most surprising thing you found out trivia-wise, though? The most surprising thing you found?
About Ted Cassidy?
Yeah.
I think my favorite one, I'm going to say it quietly, so I don't want them to know. So it's when in the 1960s, he was a disc jockey in Texas, and he was one of the first people to interview people after the JFK assassination. And that was a really interesting fact for me to learn. I was like, wow, that's
Part of history,
yeah,
yes.
part of history. Yeah. But that was one of the harder, I think last year we did a trivia game, and that was one of the harder questions for some people. I think the older people in the crowd got it from the fact it was Dallas, Texas in 1960s that really informed them. But so, yeah, it's a neat fact. Yeah.
There were actually some rumors out there about him, which I went crazy about, and I thought it was also kind of an opportunity to set the record straight, and started up with all the media sites, and Mark, my media guy over here with the hat, stand up, Mark, say hi. He's really the reason this is all happening. He and I got together and decided, well, maybe it is, and we're giving it a shot. It seems to be. People seem to really enjoy Dad, of course, and my stories about Dad, which I love, and I love doing that. So it's been going really well.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear it. And we will be addressing a rumor later, I think. All right. My next question for you guys. So I just wanted to ask about your first thoughts on coming. Well, you're coming back to Philippi. I know you've been visiting here for 50 years, but I was going to ask you about your thoughts on Philippi, and also Chris, what he first thought when he first came to Philippi.
Thank you. No, it's just great. It's great. I mean, obviously the favorite son is Dad, but I've kind of taken over the mantle, I guess, for him. So that's kind of fun for me.
So, and while we're stopped here taking a break, so the next and final step that I'll do, I've already been using some powder, and what I do, kind of what any artist does, is sort of step back and look and see what it looks like at a distance. So I'm in the process now of doing more blending, but without losing the contours, and that's always the challenge. But is he starting to look more and more like Lurch, or son of Lurch? Is it working? Okay.
So you've talked a lot about your dad and his legacy and everything like that, but I would like to ask you, what's a cool fact about you, Sean?
Oh. My son is here. He just gave a best man speech a couple of weeks ago when I got married. You want to reprise your role?
Do you have the best man speech ready at this exact moment?
Maybe.
That would be great.
Come on up.
Yes, Trevor, come on out.
Trevor Cassidy, everyone!
All right, so everybody pretend we got married. We had our first dance. Sitting there, Trevor gets up, and now I'm in trouble. This is my son, Trevor, everyone. This is Ted Cassidy's grandson.
Hi. This is odd, but sure.
When do you ever do this a second time?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
All right, good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Trevor. I am Sean's son, and I thought that would be obvious given the physical similarities between us. My dad asked me to be his best man, which both honored and surprised me. My dad and I have a fantastic relationship, but despite being his son, there were people at his wedding who knew him far longer and probably better than I did in some ways. But my dad is full of surprises. When you get a look at him, he is a large, athletic, brick house of a man. Not quite as large as Ted, but big. He's a jock. He's 6'7", 250 pounds of muscle, and can bench 277 pounds. He would want me to include the 7. He's a gym rat, works out 4 times a week, eats well. The records he set in high school basketball were only broken by a future NBA Hall of Famer. Now he spends his time on the driving range and golf course. I wouldn't necessarily call what he does there golf, but he takes some swipes at the ball, and we are so very proud of him for trying. And if all you do is see him passing by, that might be your impression of him. But when you start talking to him, you learn that my dad took Latin in high school, was his school's valedictorian, went to Harvard, UCLA, and Berkeley, and has an extensive book collection on Civil War and World War II history. 2 of the allowable choices on the list of sudden midlife crisis obsessions. And that's when you realize this guy's not a jock, he's a friggin' nerd. And if you really get to know him, the surprises keep coming. You understand that my dad is one of the gentlest and kindest people any of us know. The only time you'd feel intimidated or scared of him is if he needs to be somewhere and cannot find his wallet. You either help or get out of the way because you are in the path of Hurricane Cassidy. He taught me that it's okay to show your emotions, happiness, anger, despair, and that crying isn't a sign of weakness, that love is stronger than a 277-pound bench press. It's something crazy, something superhuman like a 278-pound bench press. Our parents set an example for us that we either try to emulate or desperately rebel against. And for the rest of my life, I will be trying to love as emphatically and strongly as my dad does.
That was Trevor's 15 minutes. We promised.
Thank you for inviting us to your wedding part 2. It was very sweet.
All right, and
I have one question. I have one last question, and this is a crowd question, and it's a bit of a trust exercise. There's a lot of people from Philippi and whose families are from Philippi in the crowd tonight, right? All right, I need you all to close your eyes. I really mean it, close your eyes, because we need honesty here. How many of you believe that your mother or your grandmother went to prom or a school dance with Ted Cassidy? How many of you believe it? I see. All right, it's okay. Our eyes are closed. We can be honest here. No one? That is so odd.
I saw a couple of hands.
I see a couple of hands.
There's
I
one,
see
two, three.
1, 2,
There was
3.
some over here. I
Well-
just think it's funny. Last year there were about a dozen women who came up to me who said they went to the prom with my father. So I think that number just keeps getting bigger as people's memories get better.
Yes.
everybody ready to reveal Son of Lurch this year? All right. Go ahead, sir. Son of Lurch. This is called Bridge to Philippia. Research indicates that Elwood and Emily, still residing in Pittsburgh, took road trips to visit neighboring towns and states. One such town was Philippi, West Virginia. These trips were often a hankering to just pack a picnic lunch and get away for an afternoon. And so it was that in 1931 they headed off to explore environs that were only a few hundred miles away. By the time Elwood and Emily reached the edge of the little town, they had polished off 3 egg salad sandwiches, a jar of sliced pickles, and a couple of bottles of ice-cold orange crush. The couple had come up to the outer mouth of the two-way covered bridge, but rather than drive on through, they had to stop. Elwood applied the brakes and brought the automobile to a gentle halt. A few hardy men were diligently working on the upper facade, applying wooden letters to a sign that would show out over the incoming and outgoing roaded areas. There were 3 20-foot ladders leaned up against the bridge. 2 of the men were teetering upon the upper rungs. The ground man raised his hand to signal Elwood. Smiling, he approached the car as Elwood rolled down the driver's side window. The gentleman removed his cap, wiped the sweat off his brow with a bald hanky, cleared his throat, and spoke politely. He explained that the place was a temporary construction zone and that they were erecting a new sign. Given just a couple of minutes, they could slide the ladders over to each side and allow the Cassidys access. Elwood asked about the sign, and the kind worker told him what he knew. It was all about history and pride and having something that Philippi could call its own. As Elwood and Emily listened to the story, they realized they were in a very special place. According to J.K. Matiliano and Lois Giomond in Milestones, A Pictorial History of Philippi, the Philippi Kiwanis Club decided to preserve the historical significance of the bridge by placing a sign on both ends of the bridge. Mr. Ralston Shaw was chairman of the committee when the project was completed.
The Cassidys read the words being affixed above the bridge's portals. They mused at the respect the town gave the structure, its history, and the manner in which the people chose to commemorate such a significant event, to honor what had ostensibly become hallowed ground during the war between, or rather among, the states. The sign read, Philippi, West Virginia, scene of first land battle of Civil War. This bridge, erected in 1852, served both north and south in passage of troops and supplies across mountains into Virginia.
Lurch Fest has been good for you, and Chris has been good for Lurch Fest and for Philippi. It's a wonderful association.
Thank you so much.
So a little different question. You have a wonderful tribute to someone named David Skull. I don't know who that is. What is that?
Okay. In the front of the book, you all will find a dedication to a man named David J. Skull. And then there is a lengthy tribute. And, you know, my wife and I were talking about discussing whether or not it should be included in the book. And I decided that it was relevant to include this tribute to David Skull, and here's the reason why. David Skull was the foremost authority on all things Universal monsters. He has written extensively and published extensively on Dracula, the history of Dracula, Bram Stoker, and it's just, I have read all of his books, and one of them that I read was a biography on Claude Rains. Some of you may remember Claude Rains was the Invisible Man, among other great things. He was, of course, in Casablanca. Claude Rains, that biography inspired me and helped me to understand more about how to write a biography. I knew about David Skull by watching his extras on all the DVDs. If ever you've seen any of the Frankenstein Universal, Mummy Universal DVDs, there's always an extra, and there's a documentary. David Skull is the man who would be in front of the camera and behind the camera, and he just became famous among my circle of horror fiends and fans and all of that. So, the very odd story, I really wanted to meet David Skull, and for 15 years or so never got the opportunity. Carolina and I were going to Madrid, Spain last year in November and discovered that David Skull was going to appear at a theater in Madrid, Spain, introducing the Spanish language version of Dracula. Long story short, I finally got to meet my hero, David Skull. Got pictures taken with him, sat down with him. He wrote a wonderful tribute for me, a nice blurb for the front of the book. You can read it there on the cover. And it was just a wonderful trip, and I couldn't believe I met my hero. January 1st of 2024, David and his partner were driving in Glendale, and a oncoming driver flipped over a medium and crashed into David's car, and he was killed immediately. I didn't want this evening to be a downer, but you have to understand why this is important that I included the tribute. So we lost David Skull, one of the great scholars, and I felt that's the reason I need to include a tribute to him in this book, because it all happened so quickly and all close together. But I'm just so happy. Perhaps the man upstairs made it work out that I could meet David before he passed.
And I think it's really relevant because it's pretty obvious that the original Charles Addams Lurch was based on Frankenstein. And when Dad took on the role, he hated that. And he did his best, and he was pretty successful in turning Lurch into something a little looser than the stiff Frankenstein. And I think in retrospect, Dad shouldn't have worried us so much, because when I think about Boris Karloff and his portrayal of Frankenstein and how tender and human that monster was, it was the same thing Dad brought to Lurch. There was a tenderness, there was a respect for others. He was different, but he was true to everyone, and I think, as I said in some tribute somewhere, Boris and Dad, they brought humanity to a monster world, and so I think it's good to bring that up. very relevant.
Thank you.
Chris.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned you came to Philippi. I know there's some newspaper articles, there's stuff out there, but still it was the 60s and 70s. How did you do your research for this book?
Very good. I'm very much an analog guy. I really am old school, and I love libraries. So I visited the libraries in my hometown in Columbia, but I also went to the Stetson Library and worked with a lovely young lady named Kelly Larson. She's no longer working there at Stetson, but she was great and brought out lots of wonderful, what we call primary source material. Primary source material is wonderful. It's the actual stuff that you can hold from the old days. And I loved looking at that. A lot of them were play programs. So I was actually holding the play programs from Stetson University's Stover Theater that Ted Cassidy was involved in. So I don't know that Ted ever actually touched those programs. I don't know that he had his DNA on them, but we know that they came from that era. So that's one of the things I did. I ordered a lot of books, and my wife is not happy about that. I always downplay it. Oh no, this book was only $2 on eBay. But I ordered a lot of books as well and read a lot about people who worked with Ted and tried to pull from several different places and sources, trying to piece together what Ted's life was like. Really didn't find much of anything about Philippi, so I had to work hard to sort of uncover what life must have been like for Ted as a young man growing up here. But yeah.
Your descriptions of Philippi are detailed, beautiful, lyrical. How did you come up with the description?
Thank you. Basically, when I was here, each time that I came here, I had my phone with me. And I would walk up to the top. You guys know this better than I do, but there's like a top of a hill where I think a big building is. I don't know whether it's an old hospital or belongs to AV, I don't recall. But there's also a cemetery up there someplace. So as I walked up there, it was a long walk. I got a lot of exercise. I turned my phone on and just used it as a tape recorder. And then I described to myself what I was seeing as I walked down and saw the little town beneath me. This town, and I remember saying this to Karen Larry. Karen, are you here tonight? Awesome, hey there. I remember describing it as sort of a valley that seems to be sort of embraced by foliage. And I just love that. It also reminds me of the little Christmas villages and things like that. I'm a very sentimental sot. And so I described to myself, Sean, what I was looking at and sort of describing the hills, the valleys, the homes, the old rusted trucks on the way here and the old bridge and all those things. And so that's kind of, I would never want anyone to hear those strange and horrible words as I was trying to describe them in a very clumsy manner. But when I get back to the laptop, I'm able to sort of undo everything, the mess that I've created, and say, oh, that's right. So it's just, you do the best you can to describe everything, and I don't know, I had fun. I think it's easier for me to write about something that I really like.
Dad was a great guy, and came up through the church here in Philippi, and I think he came out with a Philippi set of morals and personality, and everyone should have that.
Now, he did take a lot of girls to the prom, so...
Oh, well, there is that.
Apparently.
I don't know how to speak to that. So in putting it together, you had resources, but you interviewed people. Who did you interview, and any of them in this room?
Okay, very good. Yes, I interviewed Sean Cassidy. That was a good one. I remember interviewing Tracy Rexroad. I remember she was one of the first ones. I talked to several people like Tammy and Karen. I think I kind of interviewed Ed Larry when he didn't know it. He was driving me and Marissa around in his truck, showing me different places, and so I had my phone turned on and I was recording him. Sorry, Ed. Let's see, Carl Swick. I certainly interviewed Carl at the Medallion. I wanted to know what his thoughts were on Lurch and playing Lurch. But some of the I interviewed Marissa. One of the fun interviews I had was with Carl Stroiken, and if you all know Carl Stroiken, he played Lurch in the Barry Sonnenfeld films from the 1990s. Very nice elderly Dutch man now. He's older in his years, and I know that, Sean, you have met Carl. I think you guys did at the HorrorCon last year. Carl, you know, it's no surprise or big news that Sean and I feel like Ted Cassidy is the one, the only Lurch. I mean, he was the best, and yeah, I mean, but I felt that it was incumbent upon me to speak to speak to some other Lurches to sort of get their idea of what it was to play the role and how they felt about Ted. So I interviewed Carl Stroiken. His interview is in the book. Christofer Hart, who played the role of Thing. He did the hand in the Barry Sonnenfeld films. Christofer Hart is an extraordinary magician, and he told me all about getting that role. That interview is also in the book. I interviewed the first gentleman who played Lurch on Broadway in they call it the new Addams Family Musical. It's hilarious. It's been that way for the past 10 years now, I think. The new Addams Family Musical. Talked to him about Lurch and what he thought about the character, and about Ted Cassidy and his life.
Thing in the movies? What was it?
Christofer Hart.
All right, I have something I was just thinking as he said this. As you know, we all love Ted Cassidy's Lurch. He's the best. Okay, blah, blah, blah. He came from Philippi. Of course we feel that way. But I want to state, Dad was also the quintessential Thing. Now, hopefully you know at this point, Dad was Thing. That was his hand. And I remember Dad at home practicing in front of a mirror and looking at it and figuring out ways to make a single hand be emotional and communicate. And you remember from the show, the hand was straight up out of the box like this. In the movie, it's down like this. It's a different character. It's the severed hand. And once again, I think Dad's Thing was it, and actually communicated the best of anything ever. So.
And if you look, and if you look back, obviously, I think we all know this now. It's really fun to look at those reruns of The Addams Family and try to see. You can tell when it's your dad's hand because it's large and it's expressive and it's just really, it's a wonderful creature all its own. And then obviously the scenes where Ted is actually there, it's someone else's hand and it's just not the same at all. So it's kind of fun to look at that.
Yeah, right. They didn't have split screen then, and there wasn't just one person they went to when Lurch was in the scene. Sometimes it was a director, sometimes I understand it was
Jack Voglin.
Okay.
The assistant director, Jack Voglin.
And I think there was a grip. I remember hearing a story about a grip who had a certain hand that worked, and John Aston was occasionally also Thing. But anyway, I just thought, so Lurch and Thing, Dad owns them. All right, we'll move on. So you mentioned, and I think this is interesting, you mentioned that you did not include any stories about Dad being bullied because he was different in that he was so much taller when he was young. And I'll relate that, he grew up in a small town in the 40s, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was not quite as tall, but I didn't experience anything like that. And I don't remember Dad ever mentioning it to me. So even though I have seen mentions of that out there, I don't know what they're talking about. So,
Interesting.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you, you didn't put that in, and I think that's fine. Were there other things that you decided to leave out that maybe you can share with us?
And you can speak to this, Sean. So one of the things is, I remember Sean telling us, and he may have made it public as well, just going out with his dad in the 1970s to a restaurant or a cafe, and then your father being approached at the table, which he is often wont to do, and just feeling as though if someone were to refer to him as Lurch or something like that, he made it very clear that his name was Ted Cassidy, kind of like Bond, James Bond. And I didn't include that story because, it was just one of those moments that I think anyone under Ted Cassidy's his experiences, he would not want to be remembered for having a moment where he had to correct somebody.
Yeah, for the arguing with fans, right? That's not something you want to include. Well, what that came from was Dad was classically trained. He wanted to be Cyrano de Bergerac. He wanted serious, dramatic acting, and he did not see Lurch as that. He didn't really appreciate the character he created his entire life. I would hope that today, if he were alive and he would look back, he'd appreciate just how much we love that character and really how much a part of Americana it has become. So it came from that. He didn't want people to think of him as Lurch. He wanted to be addressed as Ted Cassidy, thinking of other roles perhaps. Of course, that was the most famous. And that was always tough, and it was tough for me, to be honest. Because I was around that, and I would see Dad get upset when people called him Lurch adoringly. These were people who loved him and loved the character, and they don't know that they're supposed to call him Ted, and they called him Lurch, and he would get all upset. And as a youngster, I didn't process all of that. What I saw was my father getting upset. For years, if anybody referred to him as Lurch, I would get upset, and I would yell or argue. Now I feel about it very differently. Fans have a certain limited understanding of an actor or a character, and the character has become beloved, as I said. I think he would think differently about it, but that's where that came from. It just made him feel less than he wanted to be.
So I decided not to include
so that was a good idea.
There's one other, and you're welcome that I brought it up tonight in front of everyone. No, and then there's just one other thing, and one good thing, Sean, I found that really relieved me about just ending the book at 1966 with the cancellation of the Addams Family was that there is some, and we won't go into it tonight, and this is up to Sean, and maybe that'll be for another book, but there was certainly some controversy about the burial spot of your father, and we don't need to go into it, but I didn't include, obviously, didn't need to.
And by the way, when we talk about things aren't coming up here, we are going to Little Mo's.
That's right, folks.
There's
an after party.
There's an after party. Have some food and drink, and I'll just be talking stories. So it should be fun.
Is there anything you want to say about that controversy, or do you want to just save that for another time? Because it's kind of it's interesting. But
it's interesting. It's layered. Let's just leave it for the moment at I don't know where his cremains are. It's actually, if you look it up on the internet, there's some sites about some strange burial sites or people, they don't know where they're buried. Dad's one of those. I thought I did. I went to the spot where I thought he was buried 3 different times with a metal detector because his cremains were in a box. Could not find it. So to this day, I don't know. I keep trying to piece it together in my mind. I think that if Dad had been, he was unconscious for a few weeks before he passed away. If he had been around and thought about it, he might have said, "Scatter my ashes here or wherever," and then there wouldn't be a gravestone. There wouldn't be some kind of marker, as there is not now. So I just try to think of it that way. And my sister and I, there's no place to go, but of course, we have our memories. So that's kind of a mystery that's unsolved. There might be an answer to that one day. Cool. Sure. Yeah. So the book, of course, is a story, but books also have messages. What would you like people to take away from this book?
I think that the takeaway from this is that throughout Ted's life of adversity, because he was taller than most and he had his struggles, he was just like everyone else, except he was extraordinary. Ted Cassidy, also, I want people to walk away knowing that he was a Renaissance man. Not everybody knows that he was a musician and that he was an incredible swimmer, and that he was very much an artist. Like you say, he was a classically trained actor, so I would love for people to know. I think we already know he was a great down-home guy and that he grew up in a wonderful place, but that he was multifaceted. I think that's what we need to walk away with.
Great dad.
Yes,
Great dad.
Great father.
That's for sure. Nice. I'm going to ask this one. Maybe you asked me to ask this. I don't know. This is a big year for you. Something spectacular is happening in October. What is that?
Okay, yes, briefly. Thank you for asking me, Sean.
It just occurred to me.
It just occurred to you, yeah, I know. Well, this is a big year, so not just Lurching Forward coming out, but 2 years ago, I had written a play called Amityville 1925. And it is actually a story about the very first Irish family, by the way, who actually lived in the colonial home in Amityville, Long Island, New York, in 1925. And so I wrote the play, produced it in Columbia, South Carolina, with little fanfare. 2 or 3 years later, it has been selected to be produced and have its European premiere in London, England in October. So hopefully my wife and I will be able to board a plane and go to London. Are you listening to this, honey? Are you taking notes?
Taking notes.
Okay, and go see the European, London premiere of Amityville. They're calling it the Amityville Haunting, and so that's not unusual to sort of sometimes have a title change, but I'm just thrilled. This is so that's the big thing.
Well, this book is done. You're now selling it. I know it'll be a bestseller any day now. And I just want to take a moment to thank you personally.
Thank you.
I know this was a labor of love for you, and I love my father so much, and I can't tell you what it means to me that you undertook this and did such a wonderful job, and a tribute to my father like that. It means a lot to me. I thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
So after this one, I know you're full of ideas and energy. And what's the next project?
Okay, thank you again for asking. Off the cuff, these questions are amazing. So the next book I've already begun. April 22nd was the day, so I can sort of keep track of how long it takes me now to write a new book. The next book is on something that no one knows about, but it's on Orson Welles, and it's his 1938 radio production of Dracula. Now, the reason that is interesting to me is because I love, obviously, Dracula, and I love Orson Welles and his work. But few people know that he did, with his Mercury Theater of the Air, a production of Dracula in 1938 in July. Now, why do people not realize that? Well, that's because that in October of the same year, he did a little radio show called War of the Worlds. And so, you'll just have to look that up and find out what happened with his radio show of War of the Worlds. But so the next book is called A Vampire on Mercury, and I hope that it'll be out, if not next year or the year after. Thank you, everyone.